that people are still clamoring for a type of stability within this extremely unprecedented and chaotic, in a good way, many think, moment of January 25th onward. I've been reminded again and again of a book that I read 10 years ago by a very well-known sort of Arab intellectual, kind of social critic, by the name of Hisham Shirabi. He was at Georgetown, and I think he died about 5 years ago. But his book, he wrote a book that, while considered controversial by many, has also had, it's one of those ideas that never quite died, because it did have some sort of resonance. Let me describe it to you for a moment, and I would ask us to maybe contemplate whether, what this sort of means. He puts forward the argument, and actually Dr. Anderson touched on some of the details of this, of a sort of, he does a tracing of, and he kind of comes from a Marxist background, but he does a tracing of the development of capitalism and modernity in Egypt in particular, but also he kind of talks about the entire Arab world, but Egypt is his major example, starting from the Ottoman period to the present, and divides this into 3 periods: the Ottoman period, the period of European colonialism, and the present. And he puts forward this idea of a kind of dependent capitalism, which is to say that the major trends in kind of thinking about modernity is that you sort of need a capitalist system in order to fully attain modernity. However, in the Arab world, he argues, because of the conditions of dependence on Western Europe and on the US later, capitalism was never able to take any sort of organic form that really created a really functioning labor class and a real bourgeoisie. So this is his argument. What's interesting is that he connects that argument, which is sort of fairly common argument, to what he calls neo-patriarchy. Now, bear with me here, because I think some of the terminology might be a little bit, I don't know, somehow controversial, but he doesn't mean it that way. What he talks about is somehow this connection between this kind of unformed capitalism and forms of social relations that he calls neo-patriarchy. What is neo-patriarchy? It is the existence of a father-like leader, you know, in the form of a dictator to whom people fear, which is mirrored, he argues very interestingly and somewhat controversially, in the family structure. And then the only mediator between the leader and the common person is the mukhabbarat. So you have a kind of situation socially in which people are very used to a very strong leader, as a way of kind of managing social relations in an environment where capitalism or an economic system has not taken an organic form. And then, you know, I'll read to you his description. He actually gives a quote from Naguib Mahfouz, the Egyptian writer, describing this type of person. He leads a contemporary, i.e. modern life. He obeys civil and penal laws of Western origin and is involved in a complex tangle of social and economic transactions, and is never certain to what extent these agree with or contradict his Islamic creed. Life carries him along in its current, and he forgets his misgiving for a time until one Friday he hears the imam or reads the religious page in one of the papers, and the old misgivings come back with a certain fear. He realizes that in this new society he has been afflicted with a split personality. Half of him believes, prays, fasts, and makes the pilgrimage. The other half renders his values void in banks and courts and in the streets, even in the cinemas and theaters, perhaps at home even among his family before the television. So the question that I wanted to put forward here, and again this is an attempt, and this is always dangerous to try to talk about deep structures or what might really be happening culturally, he actually has let me tell you what he also says about the kind of fundamentalism discourse, which is a bit outdated, I think, now, versus the secularist discourse, as a way of ending my comments. He describes the fundamentalism discourse as